to check in to watch the recording afterward. So the nice thing is, hopefully, that'll give us a nice intimate group here to be able to have a good conversation, with our esteemed author and all around provocateur. How would you say that?
Provocateur.
Provocateur. That's right, provocateur. Grant Lichtman, which is really exciting. So right,
So it's unfortunate that so many of us still, sort of take advantage of the feed me something from a spoon and I will listen to it rather than I will engage with my colleagues and ask questions. That's hopefully we're getting better at that with the new era of virtual comfort with virtual learning.
Yeah, I think I think the other hard side of it too is to figure out what time of day to do these things anymore. That used to not be such a challenging question, but these days, I have been on video calls today for probably 5 hours, as many of you sit on for quite a bit of time. So it definitely can get to be challenging by the end of the day, but we appreciate you sticking in and hanging out with us here this lovely afternoon. Fall afternoon here. So in the spirit of rewarding all of us that have jumped in here on time, I wanted to take a moment and just acknowledge you and thank you for being here. Really appreciate it. My name is Jabez Lebret. I'm the CEO of Applejacks, a tutoring platform that helps teachers connect with students and parents for online or in-person tutoring. And I'm joined today by none other than one of my favorite people in education, who I've known for a few years in San Diego. He speaks with candor and is not afraid to share what I believe are ideas that should be pushing us forward and stretching us a little bit and trying to get us to move that ball down the field for making real change, with none other than the author of Thrive, Mr. Grant Lichtman. Thank you for joining us.
Nice to be here. Thanks, Jabez. Thanks for having me.
So we decided to do a Q&A format on this. And again, as I said, if anybody wants to speak up, by all means, I've got the chat box open. So if you jump into the chat, we can use that. If you want to raise your hand, go ahead and do that. And we can call on you and we can make this an interactive conversation. We are also going to be writing an article for Forbes education channel from this conversation. So I like to say that out front so that everybody knows what we are talking about today. If for any reason you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I said that, I really don't want that to be in print, that's okay. It doesn't have to be. Just send me a message saying, hey, I made a comment there that I don't know that came out right. But yeah, so I'm looking and excited to write an article about this conversation wherever it goes. So I don't even know what the article is going to be yet. And that's always kind of exciting for somebody like me to get a chance to have that opportunity. So I wanted to kick it off with my first question for Grant. And this question is around the idea of how, Grant, you spend a lot of time talking about how big systems, we've been trained to think that large systems have large inertia and they're difficult to change and they don't move very easily. You're, and then you've been kind of given the idea that it's this big, huge behemoth aircraft carrier and education can't turn quickly because it's this big aircraft carrier. And you've acknowledged that the recent happenings of the pandemic and everything that's hit us over the last 6+ months has really brought to light the fact that it can change, that it isn't something that is this, it could never possibly change on a dime, because we did change on a dime. What are some things that you are seeing or hearing, or people that you've noticed are actually enacting change or experimenting or adjusting the system? What are you seeing now, 6 months down the line, with this moment of forced change? And here we are launching into the next school year. Schools have started. What are you seeing out there that is working, not working, that you think is interesting on that front?
Well, Jabez, if I can, let me contextualize this. Let me back up one step and then maybe speak more to your direct question. Let's understand where we are in this moment in time, this moment in history, which I think it goes almost without challenge, is the most disruptive, challenging moment in the history of education, one of the more challenging moments in the last several hundred years of human history. If we just think about education, for the last couple of decades, a number of us have been saying, look, there are really sort of three existential challenges that education is facing. Why should we change our schools? What's that going to look like, and how do we get there? And in fact, the first of those questions, why should we change, is probably a question that train sort of left the station about a decade ago, though some school communities are still sort of catching up and wrestling with that. And really, in fact, the what should schools look like in the future question has largely been, we're in the process of answering that globally. There's not a lot of argument that we should be shifting away from a sort of traditional sit and get industrial model of education to something that's much more preparatory for our students as they look at a future that is much more volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous VUCA world. We're really focusing on how do we get there, which speaks to your question. But then we have to overlay that sort of decades-long challenge that we've been going through on what's happened just in 2020. And we're not facing just one major challenge. I think we're facing four. We have the pandemic, which completely disrupted the school operating system. We have the economic fallout of that, which is going to be around for a long time and significantly challenge budgets and the resources that we have available to us. We have a very overdue, long overdue reawakening of the issues around social justice in this country, which have now extended globally to some extent. And fourth, I would say we're in a political environment exacerbated, frankly, if I can editorialize for a moment, by what appears to be a complete abdication of basic rules and principles that underlie our democracy that are going to take place when one party forces through a Supreme Court replacement for Ruth Bader Ginsburg here in the next few weeks or next months. A process that I believe, and I've just written a blog about this, I'll probably publish tomorrow, that I think has the potential to rip this country apart, quite frankly, because it challenges the underpinnings of our democracy in terms of what fair play means. So we have these, we've had this long set of challenges for education. We overlay that onto what's happened in 2020 in the last 7 or 8 months. And this is a remarkably challenging and evolutionary period for all stakeholders. So question is, what am I seeing out there? The simple answer is everything. There is not a type of learning that any of us could have imagined 7 or 8 months ago that isn't being tested somewhere today in America, or certainly around the world, but probably just within the 50 states of America. Many of the plans that were laid during the triage phase during the spring of how we were going to address this fall, many of those plans were disrupted over the summer and continue to be disrupted today in school districts. The degree of inequity and difference from district to district, school to school, state to state is just remarkable. And there are some potentially enormous negative consequences to that, particularly in terms of equity towards traditionally underserved populations. And there are some tremendous opportunities because as in any period of evolution, organizations, individuals, species that take advantage of changes in the environment have an opportunity to come out stronger on the other side. But this one is going to be, going to involve a great deal of real struggle. 7 or 8 years ago when I published #EdJourney, I said that changing schools was not hard, it was uncomfortable relative to the real hard things in life. Changing schools is just uncomfortable. And we've seen people our friends and neighbors undergo real hard times in the last 6 or 7 months. And there are education systems now where change is very hard. one more statement and then I'll shut up and let you get back or have some others make comments. You started by asking the question, you know, about the rate of change. And as long as I've been around education, people have said, you know, we can't change schools. It's like turning an aircraft carrier. It takes many, many years and all that. Well, that myth was busted completely in March of 2020. Many school systems changed overnight, over a week, over a month. And now they know they can do it. The question is what lessons are we going to learn? How much of that's going to stick with us? How do we stay nimble and flexible and apply those lessons over time? And what's that going to mean for the longer term?
I think that brings up an interesting thought. So I would like to get to the equity question next, because I think that is a big, big, big topic, and gaps in everything is super top of mind right now. Talking systematically, who is going to actually drive real long-lasting change? I mean, are we to expect that districts who are these behemoth machines, and it's not that they can't change quickly, but that the inertia of the machine tends to fight change, and that they're not like, are they really gonna decide to start reallocating budget dollars in ways that are going to help districts make real change? Is it the system just has to, because, well, we're where we are now? Is it parents? Is it teachers? Is it unions? Is it, I mean, like, who do you see is going to be the players, the big players moving the levers to actually initiate in real longer term change?
Well, that sort of was the subject of the previous book before I wrote Thrive. I wrote Moving the Rock, which talks about what some of those big levers are and who's going to press them and how different stakeholders can press them. The first answer is there is no one size fits all. When we talk about districts, and you use the word behemoth, or, you know, big districts, there are districts that only have 200 kids in them. I was in the state of South Dakota a year and a half ago, coming up on 2 years ago now, and I think something like 80% of students across the entire state go to school in a district with less than a few hundred students. So it's a bunch of little tiny, those districts can change. They have certain things under their control, but in terms of resources, in terms of getting the resources that they need to do things, that's not tied up just necessarily at the district level. It's tied up at state levels, regional levels, got the federal government, et cetera. So there's a, you know, we can't say that there's one set of stakeholders that are going to drive change for all schools. I think what we empirically see is that there are different ways that schools and districts change, and all of them are linked through engagement with the community of stakeholders. And that's really why I wrote Thrive. If one group of stakeholders, if the teachers decide, you know what, this isn't working, we know as professional educators, our schools should change, but they are not bringing along, and they're not in sync with the parents, with the administration, with the district, with the students, it tends to not go anywhere. It tends to be sort of isolated little pockets of, wow, Ms. Brown's doing something that's really cool, and it doesn't go anywhere. Similarly, if you have top-down sort of mandates, which we've seen come and go for decades now, and really not a whole lot has changed, especially to the most underserved communities, that doesn't seem to work. So the one common thread seems to be really authentic engagement with diverse groups of stakeholders who identify common interests, what I and many others refer to as a North Star, and then figure out how to strategically align their priorities and their resources towards implementation of those North Star objectives. That can happen in a department, it can happen in a division, it can happen at a site, it can happen in a district, it can happen in a city, it can happen in a state. But as you move up that complexity, that order of complexity, it becomes more and more difficult because you have more and more stakeholders with conflicting objectives.
Yeah, you know, it doesn't have to be a small district, and I appreciate you mentioning that. And yes, small districts are definitely more nimble. I think of like the Toledo's Ohio School District had reached out to Becky and I to talk about our tuition-free boarding school model, and said, hey, we might want to adopt that in our district as a public school. You know, it's really exciting to even just hear the superintendent entertaining the idea of something just so far out there as far as models are concerned. Obviously, boarding schools aren't really a good idea right now, but they're thinking longer term, and I'm liking to hear people thinking about like where are we going to start moving different directions to start actually hitting the whole population where they need to be.
Yeah, I mean, at least we're having that discussion now. I gave a keynote to a group of about 115 superintendents. Well, it must have been a couple of weeks before the shutdown. It must have been, I think it was in February or something like that. And I was being pretty darn direct about the need for school leaders to take some pretty radical stock of themselves and be ready to look at some very, very different options and models. And the downside of not doing it might be, shutting schools. And in the case of a small district, if you only have 3 or 4 schools, the district not being around. And, in that room, there was no one dismissing that. There was no one shaking their head. There was no one saying, we're not really being challenged that way. We're always going to get our money from the state. It's going to be okay. And that was before the pandemic hit. So I think as we saw 7 or 8 years ago, where there was more of a grassroots recognition that the discussion about why should we change school and kind of that train had left the station, we really needed to shift into what's that going to look like and how are we going to get there. I think most educational stakeholders and leaders around the country recognize that this is a moment of required fundamental change, and those who don't change will suffer the effects of evolution rather than being able to help drive those effects.
So I would like to shift into what I think is the biggest challenge that we are going to face in the next for this generation right now. When we shut our school down and had to send our students home, all of our students are severely underserved households. We had students from the foster system and all over the place, and we had to get them Wi-Fi and computers, and like they had no access to, and they had homes where in some instances the caretaker was like, no, they're not allowed to have a computer. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. This is where school's going to happen. Like that they need to have access to that. And there's a gap that is going to be increasing, and it's going to be increasing along lines of poverty and along lines of race. And I'm curious, how are we going to address the very real problem that we're in right now, which is the inequity of the nature of the chaos that we're in?
Yeah. So I don't have an answer for
I was
that
gonna say,
at all.
not that you can answer all.
I don't have an answer for that at all. And
that.
in my last 2 books, I've very specifically in the introduction said that I don't have an answer for poverty, which is clearly a major problem the major problem when it comes to changing schools for a lot of our population. Here's what I am certainly willing to say. We're suffering through a pandemic, and that pandemic's going to go away at some point. We're going to get a vaccine. The negative consequences are huge. They're significant. People are dying. People are sick. There are long-term health consequences. The economy is going to be ruined for a long period of time. But at some point, we're going to solve the pandemic problem. I believe that the larger issue, the really existential issue, are the issues around empathy, justice, and equity in our society. We have, and I say this as a privileged old white man who, despite my best progressive instincts throughout my life, clearly have failed. I have failed personally, and I've failed as members of institutions at being able to do the right thing. We still are asking questions like, we've known that education has been ridiculously inequitable for decades, for well over a century, and we've done very little about it. We've known that we have institutionalized a system of racism in this country, and we've done very little about it. These things are all linked. And where are we? We're at a place where income disparity is greater than it has been in many, many generations, where social mobility is less than it has been in many, many generations, where segregation in our urban areas is greater than it has been in many, many generations. I think this is the existential challenge of our time. It's inextricably linked with education, both as a precursor to good education and as an outcome of good education. And I don't begin to believe that I have answers to that question, other than the fact that, thank God, at least a portion of our country appears to be taking the issue more seriously than we were 5 months ago.
I agree. I agree. Well said. And somebody brought up an interesting question, LaShawn in Williams in the chat, and it kind of is right on target of what I was kind of curious about next, which is, and I'm going to ask their question in piggyback on it, is kind of like painting a picture of what change might look like. And are we going to, I don't know, 18 months from now, are we just all of a sudden students are way back in the classroom like they used to be, and the bells are ringing and everything feels like it was before? Like, is what could change look like, and what does that activity
Sure.
mean for 18 months from now?
Sure. So let's put this in a little bit of, and Sean, thank you for the question. Let's put this a little bit longer contextual arc. Really about 10 years ago, many schools, stakeholders started jumping on board of what had been sort of the ground of old progressive schools, Montessori schools, things like that, and said, hold on, this sort of sit and get, take the test, regurgitate the information, get an A and go on to college model of education is not preparing our kids for their future. And so we've seen a very distinct evolution that started out as a ripple, and up until March of 2020 was, I would say, beginning to be at tsunamis across the country. And the best way we could summarize it, I think, is within the language of what many people are now calling deeper learning, which is a more student-centric, differentiated, personalized learning experience that is about engaging students, about engaging curiosity, not just giving the answers. It's about performance-based, mastery-based progress through a curriculum, and not the one-size-fits-all sort of model that we've been stuck in for the last 150 years. And we could go a lot more of that. If people want to, they can go on my website on the resources page. I have something called the Deeper Learning Cheat Sheet. If you just Google Lichtman Deeper Learning Cheat Sheet, it takes you to a PDF right there. And there are sort of characteristics at a very macro level about what does a deeper learning experience look like. And what is remarkable is that a lot of those elements are styles of learning that can happen face-to-face in the classroom. They can happen in a virtual learning experience. They can happen in hybrid learning experiences. And so there's general agreement. What's driving that? Why is that the sort of general direction that schools have been going across demographics, across geography? Because when you ask people, what do you think good learning looks like, they come up with this sort of a scenario. And so this is what our stakeholders are asking for. As professional educators, we know this is a better way to learn, a better way to prepare our students. And we see all sorts of variations of that in public and private charter schools across the country and around the world, which is why in my last book, Thrive, I published an appendix of, 150 or something schools and districts of all kinds who have already put into place various elements of that sort of deeper learning experience for their students in different ways. It doesn't look the same in every school, but there are these sort of common elements to it. So I think that's what the change is that people are looking at. And what's happened now is that we've sort of some gasoline got thrown on this fire. And how do we create that experience in virtual world? How do we create it in a hybrid? How are we going to create it as we're coming back face to face with different densities of student populations? Those are our drivers. Those are our goal points, our North Stars. How do we get there in the fall of 2020 may look very different than how we get there in the fall of 2021, but at least we're starting to get better agreement around what those goalposts should be.
So to unpack some of what you said, some very, very big, very scary, large things: student-centered approach, proficiency-based mastery transcript style approach to assessment. I think of like our we gonna see challenges with just teachers not necessarily having been properly taught how to teach in that way? Is there a fear of control, losing control if you let the student start to take the lead? Is there going to be issues around assessment? And oh my gosh, how do we know if they're progressing and learning if we're not testing
Sure.
them every step of the way?
Yep. All the above, all the above. One of the chapters I wrote in Moving the Rock had to do with the poor way that most of our teaching colleges and universities are preparing our teachers. They're still preparing them for the last 50 years, not for the next 50 years. That is starting to change at some good colleges and universities. It's not changing it a lot. So that's a real challenge. There are some schools and districts that are taking that on themselves and saying, you know what, we know what this looks like. Teachers are going to teach teachers. We're not going to send our people back out for a certification or a master's degree somewhere. We know how to do this, so we will train ourselves. As Teresa put in the chat, that she sees many teachers are ready for this change. That's what's encouraging, is that, and I've had the good fortune to visit something north of, I don't know, 225, 250 schools and districts in the last 7 or 8 years. And the vast majority of teachers at most schools want to see this kind of change. That's why they got into education. They didn't get an education to hand out a worksheet and grade a quiz on Friday. They got into it for the right reasons. And so once we get those professional educators together with parents who want these sort of change, with students who want these change, it becomes less of, oh my goodness, I have to let go or I'm going to lose something, to, oh my goodness, we all actually want to move down this path together. Isn't that exciting and energizing and wonderful? And now we have the added tool of, we know we can change because we did last spring.
So
that
what are
excuse is gone.
Yeah, what are some strategies that you see that are working for teachers who, so I think to Teresa's question, another, layer to that is, how can an educator help make change a reality? Like, what are some things that they can do that they can actually help that process along?
We have a limited amount of time. There's a whole chapter and actually almost 2 chapters on that in my book, Moving the Rock. What can parents do? What can a classroom teacher do? What can the district educators do? What can the people at the colleges and universities do? All helping to sort of pull on the same oar. So, as a classroom teacher, what can you do? Google Edutopia. Go on Edutopia and find out what your colleagues are doing. Go look at the video library that Edutopia is building up that makes it so easy to understand. Wow, I can do that too. I can do that in my classroom. You can work with a small team that says, we're going to tackle one of these elements of deeper learning. And you know what? I feel comfortable with these elements of deeper learning, and you feel comfortable with those. Let's share successes with each other. I've gotten together with a number of schools where we literally do that. We take that deeper learning cheat sheet, and I ask a faculty of 100 teachers, pick the 1 or 2 things that you're comfortable with on this list. Might have to do with physical spacing in the classroom. It might have to do with assessment. It might have to do with grouping or project-based, whatever. There's all kinds of things, technology. Pick 1 or 2 things you're comfortable with and be willing to share your successes and how you do that in a little 10-minute talk to your colleagues. And then walk over to the group over there where somebody has said, I'm good at these things, and you've said, I'd like to get better at those, and listen to them and try to train some of those in your learning. And in a period of 45 minutes or an hour, teachers get 5, 6, 7, 10 new ideas about how they can develop a deeper learning system in their classroom, and the whole school's doing it together. So we know what that process looks like. Many of us are following the Kotter model of organizational change, which has been proven over and over and over again to work. If you're not familiar with John Kotter, you can Google his last name, and the title of his book is Our Iceberg is Melting. It's about a 45-minute read. It's a fable about penguins, and all the stages of organizational change are in there. We're all following those steps, and guess what? Schools are changing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like Education Reimagine's another group that's doing a lot of work on talking about student-centered stuff. Obviously your book has so many resources in it as well. Real quick, I want to take a quick check-in with everybody that is still here. Something that we are going to do that is just kind of a little extra bonus, because I love it when we get smaller groups and we're having a really good conversation and chat. And I want everybody to feel like they walked away with all of the resources available. Grant has been gracious enough to offer 2 books to give away, and Apple Jacks, our company, is going to give everyone else a book. So Grant, thank you very much for your kind offer, and we're going to cover the rest so that everybody here gets a chance to read through the Thrive book, because it really is a fantastic resource, I would say, for how to approach some of these concepts that we're talking about creating change and where to go to get extra information. The only thing I need
There's
from
Jabez, let me just say, there's so much out there. And again, you mentioned Education Reimagined. There's so many networks, consortia, schools. They're all willing to share. They're posting what they're doing. There are videos out there. There's curriculum out there. I just tried to catalog in the one of the appendices of Thrive some of what I've seen, which is probably just tip of the iceberg. And so I'm just a conduit for a lot of this. I just urge people, reach out, connect. Now we're all so much more comfortable with reaching out and connecting with each other virtually than we were even 7 months ago. Take advantage of that.
Yeah, and do me a favor, if you can, put your email address in the chat here, if you don't mind, or if you want to just send it to me individually, that's fine too. But just so that way I can follow up with you afterwards, and we can make sure that everybody gets a copy of the book. I have one. Yeah, I'll make sure I send you a copy, Grant. No, I'm kidding. You sent that for everybody else. So
I
yeah,
put
if you want.
my no, I put my anybody wants to ever email me about anything, you're more than welcome to.
Yes, and you should. Grant has been an amazing resource for us in our journey in education. So I have just a question about, like, are we entering into a world where we may not ever get back into the classroom in the traditional sense?
I hope not. Well, let me. I jumped too quickly. I hope we're not entering a future where we are never going to get together face to face and meet as human beings face to face. And I don't think that that's the case. Again, I think the pandemic is. It may take a year, it may take a year and a half, but we're going to get over that. It would be a real shame if we lost the ability to interact as human beings, to touch, to give each other a hug when somebody needs one, pat them on the back, play ball against each other, those sorts of things, and as well as what takes place in the classroom. I do think before the pandemic, we were starting to see real challenges to the sort of classic classroom setup. And with the advances of virtual technology, virtual reality technologies, artificial intelligences, 10 years from now, the idea that the best learning setting is going to be a physical 700 square foot classroom with 25 kids and one teacher, or 28 kids and one teacher, it was never the right set up to begin with, and I think that's absolutely going to be going the way of the dinosaurs, as it should. So what is school going to look like? I've been saying for years, I hope that school becomes the place we come to meet, and not the place we come to learn. We can learn in the world. We can learn in so many ways in the world with people who don't look like us, who aren't in our time zone, who don't have the same experience as us, or not shoved into a room with us every day. But hopefully we will always have a place to come to meet, to share those experiences, to share those learning experiences together. I think it's terribly important from a human point of view.
Yeah, I think that sounds like an amazing way to learn. I always think back to how my educational experience growing up, and I am hopeful for this, because I do think this can spark the creativity and spark the connection to enjoying education as a whole. I am a little nervous that technology has put our students in a position where they are losing touch with education. Um, what I hear from my friends, what I hear from other educators, what I hear from mostly parents, when you talk to parents, they are, man, they are really, like, kids are saying, my 5-year-old niece, like, yesterday was like, I hate school. And I was like, God, it's because you don't know what it's like. Like you just started kindergarten and you haven't started yet. But she's not alone. You know, there's so many kids right now are really struggling with this. Are there things as educators we should be thinking out of the box on how to set our kids up for and students up for success in 2021 or at the end of this year or during this year or at any time?
Yeah, there's no question in my mind that the most significant impacts of these shutdowns are on our youngest kids. And I'm not an early childhood specialist, and so I'm not going to pretend that I have an answer to that. I think those impacts are going to be significant. I have a huge amount of empathy and sympathy for both parents and students and teachers who are trying, especially with those young kids, to make something work in a virtual environment, and it was never meant to be. As students get older, they're able to manage this better. I think the long-term impacts are going to be less, but for the youngest kids, boy, I just have huge sympathy for everybody who's going through this, and I don't have great answers. I believe some of the early childhood experts have better answers, and they're posting those radically all the time on some of the sites we've mentioned, and I'd go out to those and I would take advantage of all their good thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I appreciate those comments. So Grant, rapid fire, the biggest change that you think we're going to see in the next 12 months?
In the next 12 months, that I hope we'll see or that I think we'll see?
No, that you think we'll see. Biggest change you think we'll see in 12 months?
In education?
In education.
I think we will see that the downside of virtual learning for older students is not as bad as we feared.
All right, I like it. That's good.
I think we'll get through that one probably better than we are afraid right now. That's maybe somewhat hopeful.
All right, I hope so. I hope so. All right, number one thing that you really, really hope is going to happen, but you're probably pretty sure it's not going to actually end up happening.
I really hope that school stakeholders do not waste this great crisis. I wrote an article about this last spring. It's on my resource page. A crisis is a terrible thing to waste. And there's a tremendous amount of optimism out there that finally recognizing the depths of issues around, specifically around inequities, that we're going to make these fundamental changes. I'm not so sanguine about that. I believe in a stormy sea for a lot of people. The first time a life raft comes along, they'll jump right back on board, which is right back to where the comfort zone of where they were before. And that we will fail to learn some of the really important lessons from this crisis.
All right. And one thing that you would encourage everyone on this, like, group call here that we can go implement and do in the next week or two? Doesn't have to be a big thing, just one thing we should be considering.
I think the most important thing that all of us can do as educators is to share what we know works within the overall context of a great deeper learning experience, and whether that's a tiny little thing 1 minute a day or a new unit of curriculum, whatever it is, but to share it. Be a blogger, be a sharer. That is how, these revolutions happen, not because somebody at the top says, something's going to change and all of a sudden it does.
I love that. Sharing is caring. It's also really important. And if it is a blog or something along those lines, or a video or YouTube, social media, that's great. Another little micro thing I've been doing on the sharing side of the fence is just reaching out to people that are like good acquaintances or old friends that I haven't talked to in a long time, and just checking in. And seeing how they're doing. And then, eventually those conversations tend to lead in a lot of directions. And so I've been reaching out to those, educators that I'm friends with, and just saying, hey, how are things going? What's going on in your world right now? And just having a conversation and saying, oh my gosh, like I was, on this interview with this person, or had a chance to talk to this person, or I heard this story over here, or even just commiserating and saying, oh my gosh, yeah, we're dealing with the same struggle here as well. Can really go a long, long way. So Grant, I want to thank you so much for taking time today. We are so grateful and honored for you to come here and spend time with us in our group, here and getting a chance to just have a conversation, which, to your point about sharing, I think is one of the most important things we can do is keep this conversation going. And we just really appreciate all the work that you do and just the efforts that you put into trying to make a difference in education.
Well, thanks for having me, and thanks everybody else for taking the time to join today.
All right, with that, we will bid you all adieu. Thank you so much. Again, my name is Jabez. We appreciate you coming here today. I got all of your email addresses on there. So we'll be sending out some information for you about the book from here. And then hopefully you will get your copy. And after you get your copy, read it, and then go online and leave Grant a review only if you like it. If you don't like the book, then just forget that you read it and set it aside.
All reviews are good reviews.
I know you're supposed to say that, but I'm supposed to encourage everybody to leave a good review because it is an awesome book. So I'm really excited for everybody. So again, my name is Jabez. I want to wish you all a happy Tuesday. Thank you for joining us, and we will be in touch soon with another episode of something coming up down the line. So we'll make sure we let you all know when our next show is going to be coming around. So take care, everybody. Bye.